Hi, I'm Lana Lon, Character Art Lead on Special Projects at Epic Games. We're excited to share with you how we created the characters for the Matrix Awakens. I'll start off with an overview of how we created the player character, the crowds, and the cinematic digital humans. After that, Vuk Rekovich from 3 Lateral will walk through the actor scan and performance capture technology used to recreate the Matrix actors. Finally, Pete Sumanaseni will break down the look development process of making our characters feel real in Unreal Engine 5. The Matrix Awakens was an ambitious project with a huge cast of characters ranging from distant crowd NPCs to close-up digital versions of well-known actors. We needed to make sure it could all run in real time on next-gen console hardware. Let's start with our player character, Io. Our primary goal with the player was to cast a MetaHuman as the hero of the interactive experience, featured in real-time cinematic cuts as well as gameplay.
I am a MetaHuman, the next generation of digital human powered by Unreal Engine.
In case you didn't recognize her behind the sunglasses, Io is the same face as the first publicly announced MetaHuman, as seen in that trailer. For the Matrix Awakens, she got a custom hairstyle and Matrix-inspired outfit, but her face and body rigs had very little customization. We added sunglasses to the facial rig, but didn't modify any of the face shapes. We made some adjustments to the neck for animation, but the rest of the body rig is unaltered from the base MetaHuman skeleton. Once we got her outfitted appropriately for the Matrix, we had to give her some scenes. HMC footage of an actress was recorded and processed by the Cubic Motion tracking team, using a markerless system that tracks key contours of the face rather than dots. Stereo cameras were used to derive depth. The tracking information was then passed to the animators to solve using a pose-based solver in Maya. Animators manually posed the rig to match key expressions, then let the solver predict the rest of the shot. From there, they refined the animation, cleaning up noisy data, matching actor intent, and improving pose appeal. The animation was then imported into Engine to see everything in context with proper lighting. Further polish was done to adjust eye lines and fix sync issues. Animators were able to use a new live link process which allowed them to work in Maya while seeing the character update live in Engine. At the end of the chase experience, Io is dropped into a bustling city to explore at will. Let's talk about how we created the characters to fill that city. The goal with the crowd characters was to help make the city feel alive with a vibrant population of office workers. For a city covering 16 square kilometers, this meant over 500 visible characters at any given moment, again running real-time on next-gen console. We took our initial inspiration from the crowd that Morpheus shows Neo in the first Matrix film. We wanted to create the same feeling of walking through a dense crowd of people going about their busy day in the Matrix. We knew we needed a lightweight and modular system to create such a large amount of variety, but we also wanted crowd NPCs that fit into an ultra-realistic city environment. Early on, we laid out a list of attributes we wanted to be able to vary and went on to build the assets and mechanisms to generate the options for each type of variation. We started again with the MetaHuman Creator, knowing that there was no better source for custom, high-quality, real-time digital humans. We generated 6 female and 6 male characters with a variety of hairstyles and skin textures. We wanted to use faces that offered enough variety but weren't so unique that they would stand out in a crowd. Many of them are based on preset heads in the Creator. When imported into the project, we got geometry, grooms, materials, textures, face and body rigs, all with a full set of LODs. We built a crowd character blueprint to assemble the different components. Here you see the different heads combined with the skin texture options. On top of the 72 possible combinations of head and head textures, we had an additional skin texture modifier to introduce albedo variation on top of the selected texture. Hairstyles have a huge impact on the silhouette of a character, and unique hairstyles can make 2 people look very different in passing, even if they have similar faces. We picked hairstyles from the MetaHuman Creator that provided interesting silhouette variation, but didn't feel out of place in an everyday office worker crowd. The blueprint took care of using the correct binding to fit a hairstyle to the selected head. For bodies, we limited ourselves to 1 male and 1 female skeleton and customized 3 body shapes each on top of those. This simplified the method of mixing and matching heads with bodies and reduced the amount of custom animation. We added a morph to the heads to accommodate the neckline change for the different body shapes. To generate height variation, we uniformly scaled up or down by pre-selected amounts. To outfit these bodies, we did some design exploration of modular business wear using different necklines and silhouettes to maximize variation. The resulting meshes, skirts, jackets, pants, shoes, and accessories were layered in different ways to generate these outfit components. Here again, the aim was to maximize variety with a minimum number of meshes. Some pieces came from the MetaHuman Creator, while others were custom created using a traditional Marvelous Designer, Zbrush, and Maya workflow. In the crowd character blueprint, you can select the outfit, the material, and a variety of optional fabric patterns and complementary color choices that allow for a vast amount of visual variety. Pete will talk more in detail about the cloth material shading later on. All of these options are defined in a custom data asset so we can have full control over what bands of variation are available. For instance, rather than randomly mixing and matching outfit components, we curated specific combinations in the data asset, and the blueprint selects from those. This was also especially useful for the outfit materials because we could define exactly which patterns were used with which pieces, at what scale, and with which complementary colors. The mass crowd system generates a unique numerical ID for each crowd agent, which maps to a specific combination of options assembled by the blueprint instance. Now that we've got these people dressed for work, let's get them to the office. Base male and female locomotion cycles were captured, cleaned up, and retargeted to different body types. Locomotion layers and accessory layers were blended together in a custom layering node. Animation curves within the accessory animation control how the layering is applied to different body parts. Here we have a walk cycle on the left, a phone look-at idle in the middle, and the blended result on the right. Here's another example. We have a walk cycle on the left, an idle loop with a watch look-at in the middle, and the blended result on the right. Notice in the blended result, when she looks at her watch, Anim curves in the watch idle layer blend out the locomotion on the arms in the walk layer. The mass crowd system orchestrates which animations are fed to each instance. Now, as you walk around the city, you might bump into one of these characters and see them react. Crowd facial performances were captured using the Live Link Face app on an iPhone and directly applied to the MetaHuman face rig. Here's our intrepid animator Ed doing some capture tests driving crowd characters. Because each MetaHuman head has a custom facial rig generated based on its specific features, the same animation works cleanly on any of them. As you might expect, it's impractical to have 500 fully animated skeletal mesh characters at once in real time. In order to achieve the numbers we needed to fill the city, we used instant static meshes, or ISMs. These are static mesh representations of characters that are vertex animated with textures. For the 30 or so closest crowd characters, we use skeletal meshes with LODs. The remainder of the visible crowd characters are ISMs. We generated static mesh versions of every component used by the crowd characters. They're combined using the same unique ID generated by the mass system. This ensures that visually, the skeletal mesh version and the ISM version are using the same components. To automate the process of converting skeletal meshes to static meshes, we built a blueprint using the new geometry scripting plugin. This allowed us to procedurally remove unnecessary pieces like buttons and occluded triangles and do mesh simplification all in the editor. To capture the animation, we built a plugin that converts a list of animation sequences into bone animation stored in a texture. Because it's stored as bone animation, we were able to share the same animation textures between all pieces. In these shared textures seen on the top right, each pixel column is a bone, and each pixel row is a frame of animation. The first row is the reference neutral pose, and the rest are frames for different animation clips. Additionally, we bake one texture per mesh, where each column is a vertex on the mesh, and we use one row to store the reference neutral vertex position, and a second row to store 4 influence weights per vertex. This Anim to Texture plugin is available for you to try out in the city sample. To synchronize animation during the transitions between skeletal meshes and static meshes, the mass system is responsible for passing the desired animation and frame into the material. Other options can be tweaked in the material, like number of influences used by the skinning. 1 is for rigid binding, and 2 or 4 give smoother results. We use 2 influences in our crowd for a good balance between performance and quality. Here's our test crowd map. When I switch the view mode, you see clearly where the transition happens between skeletal meshes, which are blue, and the ISMs, which are gray. Keep an eye on the transition area as I switch back to lit mode. To keep texture sizes reasonable, only the basic locomotion is used by the ISMs, so layered animation-like accessories are not used, but the overall effect from a distance is pretty seamless. Be sure to check out Julian Marchand's portion of the Generating a World Tech Talk to learn about how the mass AI system orchestrates crowd LODs and behavior. Alright, here's the face you've been waiting to see. Let's talk about our hero digital actors. Epic has continued to push the fidelity of real-time digital humans year after year. Our goal this time was no different, to create the best possible digital humans running real-time at cinematic quality on next-gen console hardware. Vuk and Pete will break down the process of capturing, animating, and rendering these characters, but I wanted to touch on a couple of aspects of asset creation and shot dynamics. We were given the challenge of reproducing two highly recognizable actors as they appeared today and as they appeared 20 years ago. The actors were scanned at Epic 3 Lateral's state-of-the-art studios in Novi Sad, Serbia. These head assets were of course the foundations for recreating Neo and Trinity, establishing base proportions and placement of features, as well as a starting point for the fine skin details and textures. In order to create their likenesses from the original films, however, our team had to embark on a long journey back in time. We worked with Warner Brothers archives to restore set photography and digital reference from the Matrix Reloaded production. For Neo, we were lucky to have some additional reference material for his head. On the left is a scan of a life cast, and on the right is the head asset used in the film, reconstructed in Zbrush from geometry and texture maps. Perhaps the most useful reference for Neo were the multi-camera universal capture clips, used on Reloaded to capture animated performances. We took a neutral frame and used the calibrated cameras to align our asset and refine his likeness. Here's the final ZBrush sculpt by senior character artist Adam Sculpt. And here are the final assets, rendered in real time in Engine. Let's talk about the hair. Some of you may be familiar with the leap in hair technology that we introduced in Unreal Engine 4.2.4. You can now render fully dynamic strand-based grooms with real-time cinematic cuts on console. The digital actors in this demo all required hero-level strand-based grooms. These grooms are imported into Unreal Engine as Olympic files. The importer looks for attributes and groups that follow our specific naming conventions in order to transfer information such as hair width and grouping, as well as defining guide hairs for simulation. Once imported, the groom is represented by a groom asset. The groom asset editor is the home of all things hair related. Here you can define LODs, including card and helmet-based LODs, assign materials, and adjust physics parameters. In film VFX, grooms typically use real-world densities and widths because your budget for a render is in hours, not milliseconds. When working in real time, we might start with real-world densities, but then apply optimizations like decreasing strand and vertex count while increasing strand width to compensate. These are applied more aggressively to lower LODs to achieve the right balance of performance and fidelity. Now, you can't have such realistic-looking hair without realistic dynamics as well. For Keanu Reeves' hair, 3,000 guides were used to drive the simulation. On the left are the guide hairs, and on the right, each colored clump of hair is driven by one of those guides. Let's take a look at this close-up shot. The simulation parameters can be set in the Groom Assets Physics tab, but often you'll want to adjust them per shot in Sequencer. You can manipulate the head live in Editor to check how the hair responds to motion, or simply play back your shot in real time. Remember again that the cinematic sequences were all running real time on console. This proved to be a challenge for hair dynamics because the actors often jumped in location from shot to shot. We introduced a local simulation option to base the sim off a specified bone, usually the pelvis, which stabilized the strands between real-time cinematic cuts. On to the costumes. Digital actors are not complete without their digital wardrobe. Present-day Keanu and Carrie Ann's outfits were built based on full body scans from their reference shoot at Epic 3 Lateral. To reproduce Neo and Trinity's iconic outfits from the Matrix Reloaded, we were able to get photography and scans of some of the garments from WB archives, along with original reference photography from the film. Adam took a slightly unconventional approach to Trinity's jacket because it had such a tailored fit with unique seaming. Rather than starting directly in Marvelous Designer to construct the garment, a mesh was extracted from the body model in ZBrush. A slight inflation of the mesh was added for volume, and seam lines were sculpted in. Using an opaque RGB brush, seams were traced and panels were converted to polygroups using the Polygroup It plugin. Finally, ZRemesh was used with Keep Groups activated, which provided us a workable mesh to UV and import into Marvelous Designer. Zbrush's UV Master plugin was used for a quick UV unwrap using the predefined polygroups as panels. The mesh was then imported into Maya, where the UVs were laid out to mimic a more traditional garment pattern. It's important with this method that the UVs are void of any stretching or compression. Additional edges may need to be cut, and multiple unfold iterations may need to be completed before moving to Marvelous. At this point, the model was imported into Marvelous Designer using the Trace 2D pattern from UV Map option. This converted the UVs into garment panels and sewed them together automatically. Here you see a straight import with minor seam cleanup. In order to refine the fit, the model was exported from Marvelous, adjusted in Zbrush, and the UVs relaxed again to reflect the surface changes. The change in pattern was re-imported into Marvelous and traced over with the existing pattern. From there, the garment was fine-tuned in Marvelous to define the seam structure and fabric quality. Here's the raw Marvelous Designer model, imported into Zbrush to render and evaluate. Final detailing and polish was done in Zbrush. As you can see with this method, the majority of the seam and wrinkle detail comes directly from Marvelous Designer. Here it is rendered, both in our Construct Beauty environment and in gameplay on a PS5.
What they wanted. They said they were fine with your theoretical mumbo-jumbo, but they needed some sexy action.
For some hero shots, the need for art direction and high level of detail called for offline simulation. In this shot, for instance, we wanted to recreate the iconic bullet time performance as closely as possible. Neo's outfit was simulated in Houdini using Vellum, and the Olympic was imported into the editor as a geometry cache. We iterated in this format until we were happy with the look. At that point, all Olympics were re-imported as skeletal meshes using PCA decomposition. This drastically reduced the memory footprint for delivery. Thanks for joining me. I'd like to pass it off now to Vuk Rajkovic from Epic 3 Lateral to talk about the actor capture technology we use to recreate their likenesses and performances.
Hi, I'm Vuk Rajkovic, photogrammetry scanning researcher at Epic Games 3 Lateral, and I'd like to talk about using photogrammetry and photometry scanners deployed across different Epic locations to capture data used to develop high-fidelity digital doubles. And then I'm going to turn it over to Pete Sounaseni, our senior technical artist, to talk in more detail about how some of the captured data is used to bring digital doubles to life inside Unreal Engine. I'm going to start off with sort of a global intro on the topic of using custom-built photogrammetry and photometry scanners for character development. Acquiring physically and anatomically valid data is very important when you're trying to produce high-fidelity digital doubles. The uncanny valley doesn't forgive when it comes to human faces and bodies. Every collected piece of data about someone's likeness can have great impact on how the final look of a digital double will end up. It needs to be handled scrutiny of our finely tuned understanding of the human face and its mimicry. Some definitions of the terms used in this presentation. Photogrammetry is the art and science of extracting 3D information from photographs. The process involves taking overlapping photographs of an object, structure, or space and converting them into 2D or 3D digital models. Photometry is the science of measuring visible light in units that are weighted according to the sensitivity of the human eye. This is a broader definition, but it partly works in our case. We are measuring visible light in captured images, which is then transformed into certain texture maps used for achieving better character likeness. 4D. It is basically a term used to describe a number of photogrammetric scans captured in a certain time frame. There is also one more aspect of digital double capture, and that is the speed used to process the data and in what form. You can easily end up with terabytes of data, which needs to be easily readable by artists, and most of the time, the data that ends up in artists' hand will come from different scanners. So what is the purpose of all these different scanners? Why can't we capture everything in just one? Different scanners are built for different purposes, and some things are easier to capture in a specialized version of one of the capture systems. Epic 3 Lateral has currently 3 types of specialized scanners deployed. Body scanner. With its wide framing and the sheer number of cameras, it is best utilized to capture full-body photogrammetric data and non-polarized diffuse textures as well as 4D body motion. Sitting photometric/photogrammetric scanner. This scanner provides all the data used for face recreation, as well as 4D data in form of range of motion takes, later used for machine-learned rig purposes. Mobile 4D scanner. This scanner is also known as the performance scanner. It is easy to use, it has high rate of take ingestion and provides the best comfort for the talents to relax and get into their characters for the scripted performances. It is important to mention the transfer rates and storage capacities that these scanners require. Currently used machine vision data throughput for the 4D is 2 GB per second per camera. We are able to record up to an hour of 4D recording per each of the scanner per session. I will show a couple of examples of the final raw meshes from the body and photometric/photogrammetric scanners. Here is an example of meshed 4D body data. And now some mesh examples from the face scanner. These test scans were meshed using reality capture. Retopology is a process of mapping a predefined head topology to a desired neutrally posed head scan. The process includes eyeball and teeth fitting as well. The fitting quality is determined on two fronts. Artistic, how close the final head shape is to the actual living person in terms of likeness, precision of details, and features. And technical, how well the topology behaves in terms of edge loop placement. The result of the retopology process is a set of rig-ready static meshes that represents the neutral pose of the real person's face as perfectly as possible. We are capturing static and moving face shapes that are corresponding to the nomenclature defined by the facial action coding system. The different results, for example, different face expressions from the retopology and scan matching process, are moved further down the pipeline to the shapes modeling team. These artists further improve the facial deformations and define the actual look of our rigs and how believable they end up. The goal of shapes modeling itself is to import all of the available inputs, usually fax scans and/or references of any kind, even if they are in the form of photos from the web, into one coherent union, then represent the final rig. Here is an example of Keanu's rig in Maya and the faceboard with controls right beside it. The 4D capture is there to supplement the static expressions. Through analyzing the shapes through time, we are able to add one more layer of realism on top. I will just briefly mention color calibration. Even though it is a very important step for creating physics-based albedo texture maps, we took great care to minimize the specular pollution when creating calibration images. This is important because it gives us measurable deltas in color between the ground truth and light scenarios used to capture talents. Later, those deltas can be added in the final look. The light scenario used for the color chart calibration is a ring of light at 45-degree incident angle, which in turn minimizes specular light bounced off. The patches on the color chart are then looking very matte. The resulting color matrix derived from those matte color patches is very precise. All of the image pipeline is being done in linear sRGB using OCO as a color management system. I will briefly talk about different types of maps used. The albedo map is the base color input that defines the diffuse color or reflectivity of the surface. The normal map is used to redetail simplified meshes. Specular maps are black and white images in non-PBR materials that determine the shininess or reflectivity of an object in 3D. It's used in conjunction with a diffuse and normal map to enhance the realism of the object's texture. We'll calculate the specular map by subtracting the albedo map from the unpolarized color map. An occlusion map is a grayscale image with white indicating areas that should receive full indirect lighting and black indicating no indirect lighting. Occlusion map is very important for the look depth process. Transmission map is used for either Maya or DX shader backscattering. It is used in look depth process for checking translucence and sometimes subsurface scattering. Curvature map is a byproduct of the normal map. The most equivalent map would be the roughness map, but Unreal Engine has a dedicated node that creates roughness maps from normal maps in real time. We created a machine-learned rig to add non-linear movement and improve the appearance of the mesh for shots which didn't have 4D data captured for them. We've used this method for most shots which weren't the main close-up shots. We've even used machine-learned deltas to add some non-linearity to the de-aged versions of the characters. The machine-learned rig didn't give us the fidelity of a pure 4D capture, but was great for supplementing other techniques and was good enough to be used where the characters were further away from the camera. Here is an example. Because of the large memory bandwidth needed by consoles to process, we had to implement compressions for blend shapes. On this slide you can see the difference before and after. The new morph target compression system reduced morph data memory footprint by 5 to 20 times, allowing us to have multiple assets with hundreds of morph targets each in the same shot. We manually tweaked the tolerance, making sure quality was not compromised, using a value between 50 for faces and 200 for bodies. User-controlled quantization with blockwise variable length encoding. Decoding happens inline in the GPU blending shaders. No new decompression steps or intermediate buffers. Typically, a 10 times GPU memory footprint reduction, depending on the quality settings. We've also had to improve the way we solve animation from the data we capture. From better understanding what we need to pay attention to when tracking facial landmarks, to getting a better, more stable, rigid registration of the head position. We've also created more refined rules for how the solver activates control based on the relationships of the facts expressions. All this has given us more accurate and animator-friendly animation curves. We've also been able to estimate the movement and position of the neck and shoulders, which helped us better integrate the facial animation with the body. The work we did has actually raised more questions and given us ideas on what we need to further improve and address for future projects. All this also carries over to tools that we use and create, some of which will end up in Unreal Engine users' hands. We made a lot of effort to do as much work directly in the engine. When working with eye direction and look at points, working in context is crucial. Being able to edit the original performance slightly and seeing how that affects the look of the character with all of the look depth straight away is very important. We didn't have the ability to do that throughout the project. Long ingestion time of data and the work that had to go into preparing materials for review drove the effort to make as much of the work doable in the engine. The character team did an amazing job at creating an initial version of the rig for the younger versions of the characters. We referenced the original film footage extensively to refine expressions, especially in the complex network of shapes around the mouth. Once we started running the animation on the de-aged rigs, we saw where there could be further improvements. As we refined the rig by addressing specific facial expressions that were used more in the performances, we also added a layer of fine deformations that we derived from the 4D data of the original mature characters' performances. The trick was not to go off-model by using the capture from the mature faces, since they had features and details that weren't present at a younger age. But we still wanted to achieve the subtleties of the actors' performances and get the detailed non-linear deformation of the lips and face that are hard to achieve with the game rig alone. Remember, all the rigs we had in the demo are running in real time and are game-ready rigs based on the MetaHuman specifications. We used Universal Capture UCAP data from the original Matrix movies to validate our de-aged rigs, to make sure we are doing the actors justice and make sure we are true to what they looked like back then as much as we could. There was a long process of review that the characters went through, and character artists made many iterations before we were done. Animators also went through the shots with the young version of the characters and made sure that the performances carried over well. There was lots of Matrix watching going on. We wanted to make sure the likeness of the expressions and mannerisms stayed true to what their performances were like in the original Matrix trilogy. I'd like to thank you for tuning in, and I'm going to hand it over to Pete, who will talk more about the look dev process.
Hi, I'm Pete Simoneseni, Principal Tech Artist at Epic Games. Thank you for joining us as we take a deep dive into character look development on The Matrix Awakens.
The job of a look development artist is to first find out what is real. The second step is to replicate it inside the computer. Thirdly, if you can't replicate reality with the tools at your disposal, you have to try some clever ways to fake it. Remember, in computer graphics, it only has to look real, while the underlying information doesn't have to be perfect. To answer the initial question of what is real, let's take a look at the reference material we used for the Matrix Awakens demo. From the scanning session in Novi Sad, Serbia, home of 3 Lateral, we received 3 sets of OLAT images: non-polarized, cross-polarized, and parallel polarized. OLAT is an abbreviation of one light at a time. By analyzing these images, we are better able to match the skin material properties. Here is an example of a recent non-polarized OLAT scan from 3Lateral. Cross-polarization lets us see the skin without specular reflection. You've probably seen a phenomenon similar to this if you have used polarized sunglasses. When looking at a subject such as water or glass, polarized sunglasses block out most of the reflections from reaching your eye. Shown here is an example scan of our principal scientist, Ian Matthews. Parallel polarization is the opposite of cross-polarization. Parallel polarization lets in any light that would have been blocked by the cross-polarization. One caveat is that the diffuse is also cut in half, so you can't use these images by itself. If we subtract the cross-polarized reference from the parallel polarized reference, we can extract the specular reflection of skin. Since we have all the light positions and the subject scanned, we could rebuild the scene in Unreal Engine to start doing look development. Shown here is the Unreal Engine render with our digital Keanu Reeves in the same OLAT setup that I described. We use this by comparing the images side by side and start matching diffuse albedo, specular, normals, and subsurface scattering properties. And here is Carrie Ann Moss in the same setup. If we are able to match the reference in a many light setup, we should be able to use that look dev in any lighting scenario. For reference photography, we were lucky enough to be able to get raw data from the original reference shoot that Keanu Reeves and Carrie Ann Moss did for us. Shown here is the 360 turntable reference of Keanu Reeves color corrected and in linear space, and our reconstructed Keanu Reeves inside of Unreal Engine. You could see that his clothing were also scanned and matched with the reference material. Having the target lighting as reference is really helpful when trying to match reality. On the right is a close-up of our digital Keanu Reeves, and the photo reference is on the left. The same setup was used with Carrie Ann Moss. Shown here is the photography reference of Carrie Ann Moss in 360 turntable form. Her clothing and even the very small details of her jewelry were also scanned and recreated inside of Unreal Engine. This is a close-up comparison with our digital double on the right and the photography reference on the left. As you could see, these reference images were also very helpful with matching her hair in our groom process. An additional requirement for this project was to recreate Keanu Reeves and Carrie Ann Moss as they were seen in the Matrix Reloaded. To help with this, WB provided us with the original reference shot for the movie. The photo reference is on the left, and on the bottom right, you see a look dev image generated out of RenderMan circa 2002. The top right is an in-progress test render out of Unreal Engine. Original Matrix Reloaded reference photography of Carrie Ann Moss was also used to help us match the modeling and hair. Again, this is an in-progress test render comparing real photography to the Unreal Engine. Additionally, we were able to get a hold of some great controlled studio lighting reference of Keanu Reeves shot during the Matrix Reloaded. This was originally shot for ESC's Universal Capture system. Again, comparing the Universal Capture reference to our Unreal Engine renderer. Having a controlled lighting setup with a known camera was a crucial part in matching our look development. Lastly, lots of Blu-ray captures and online photo reference was used to match the essence of Keanu Reeves at the age of the original Matrix movies. An important part of the look development is the material setup. First, let's take a look at the skin material. What you see here is a pure scanned albedo processed from raw to linear and then color calibrated. You can already see some issues. there are some areas that have not been captured, like the inside of the lips. Also, locator marks remain and some of the lighting is baked in, especially around the nose and eye socket regions. The diffuse albedo is then cleaned up by the texture artist, which includes removing captured eyebrows. The colors are then more closer matched and lighting information is removed during look development. Shown here is the same two comparison images in diffuse lit mode. A slight makeup pass was added to mimic what they would do on a real set. We also added some extra wrinkling detail occlusion, since we are not able to render displacement shadowing inside of Unreal Engine. The specular signal is relatively simple. Specularity is determined by the relative index of refraction of a surface. Human skin has a measured IOR of 1.4. Using an index of refraction conversion, we get a value of 0.35 inside of Unreal Engine. Since we are unable to do displacement shadowing and occlusion in real time, we add the cavity map generated from the scan displacement to darken the specularity in these regions. Also, additional occlusion from the hair onto the skin is painted in. This image shows the specular-only component, which is similar to the OLAT specular extraction images that I showed earlier. This scene is, of course, under a different lighting scenario, so the specular is softer compared to the smaller point light sources. If we add up the lit diffuse component and the lit specular component, we get our final pixels. From the 3L scan, we generate a normal map, which will help us define very small details that are unable to be captured in a low poly geometry. This is a world normal view showing the low poly model without normal maps. This is what it looks like when we add the normal map. You can see all the wrinkling and pore details added from this texture. Here is a lit view without the normal map applied, and the same render with a normal map applied. You can see that his face is much more expressive. Roughness is an abstract idea that defines the geometric surface variance inside a single pixel. Some areas are unable to be captured by scanning technology. We define a roughness multiplier on a microscale by a hand-painted mask. On top of this, we generate a procedural roughness from the normal map by using the Toxvig normal to roughness conversion. In every texture asset in Unreal Engine, you can add a composite normal to add to roughness. This procedurally builds a MIP tree that captures the normal map variance, which is the same as roughness, inside the texel. For subsurface scattering, we are using a real-time screen space Burley normalized algorithm, which is similar to the one used at Disney and Pixar in RenderMan productions. This image shows the skin without subsurface scattering. It makes him look a bit like concrete. And with subsurface scattering turned on, you could see it makes the skin look much more real, since it mimics the physics of light dispersing through the wrinkles of the skin. Also, the eyes look much more translucent and volumetric. Now let's zoom in to see the effect of subsurface scattering around his eye region. For all of Epic's metahumans, 3Lateral has built a process of capturing animated blood flow inside the albedo map and wrinkles inside the normal map. This is a test preview render showing the wrinkles activated while doing a furrow. They are able to capture a great amount of detail in each pose. The animated wrinkle maps are activated by the character animation. The bright colored regions in this test render show a debug view of the wrinkle map activation driven by their acting.
Hi, I'm Carrie Ann Moss, and I played Trinity in the Matrix films.
One of the optimizations that we did for the wrinkle maps was to bake lower res delta maps instead of replacing the wrinkles wholesale. This allowed us to have a large full resolution main normal map texture while maintaining smaller sized wrinkle maps. This method also enables us to make edits and tweaks to only a single map instead of 4. Rendering the eyes is one of the most difficult things to get looking realistic in computer graphics. We'll go through some of the tricks we used to get it looking correct. Since doing refraction in real time is very expensive, and it comes with a host of issues, we have to try to define the iris procedurally. If we render the eye as a default Lambertian, you can see right away the visual problem. Inside the material, we are bump offsetting the iris and refracting the texture to create the illusion of an iris geometry inside the cornea. Even with this common technique, the iris still looks like a flat plane. A displacement texture map of the iris structure is used with parallax occlusion mapping to give the iris fiber an added sense of depth. We do a normal inversion trick with a steeper fall-off to mimic the light caustics from the corneal lens. Lastly, we add a large-scale subsurface scattering to the sclera to mimic the translucency of the eye. When we place the eyeball inside the socket, there are still issues with seating. This is a common problem in computer graphics where intersecting geometry appear extra sharp and contrasty. To overcome this, we add a translucent eye shell geometry to blur the area where the eye meets the eye socket. An additional strip of geometry is placed around the edges of the eye socket to mimic the meniscus from the tear water. Take a look at the reflection right under eye in this close-up view. A very subtle effect that we observe from every scan reference is that the pupil center isn't in the middle of the iris. This is due to a physiological shift to counteract the refraction of the light rays coming into the eye. We mimic this kappa angle by shifting the pupil center towards the bridge of the nose. Everyone has a different kappa angle. The results give the sense of the eyes looking right at the viewer instead of away. This is a tiny shift, but when battling the uncanny valley, every bit of detail is important. There are a couple tricks we do to get the teeth looking more believable in real time. Similar to the eye shell, we added a teeth shell. With the teeth shell, we could calculate an additional occlusion to seat the teeth into the mouth. A common issue with teeth rendering is that they can look a little gray, and due to the Lambertian light fall-off, the edges can get a little too dark. That's because we lack a sophisticated large-scale subsurface scattering. In order to help the teeth look more translucent, we fake the normals a bit forward-facing to counteract the natural Lambertian fall-off at the edges. Next, I'm going to dive into how the MetaHuman hair material works and what we did for the Matrix Awakens. In a material node, we start with a measured LOT of all possible natural melanin and redness values. Here is an unlit view of the color we chose for Keanu. Based on the reference, we added a salt and pepper pass onto the hair. This is done through a threshold on the seed signal provided by the Groom attributes. In order to get some of the clumping details of the hair, we baked out an occlusion signal from Houdini. This is needed because some of the shadowing details were lost due to the optimizations in order to run in real time. Finally, we add a coarser scale noise variation to the hair color to give it a more natural look. This is what the final material looks like when lit. We also made use of hair cards on the demo. This was done for optimization reasons, so when you see Neo and Trinity inside the car, it's also rendering the whole city outside. We needed to switch the cards to run everything with smooth frames per second in real time. It was crucial that we had parity between the hair strand material and the hair cards material. This is a comparison image of Neo with his hair strands representation on the left and his card hair representation on the right. At this distance, the cards hold up pretty well. All the signals provided by the strands are baked down into textures and are piped into the same attributes system. In the material graph, the hair attribute nodes are shared between the strands and card materials. We had a wide variety of clothing in this demo. In order for the cloth to look consistent, we created a robust Uber shader to do all types of clothing. This is the artist's view of the material. To get a final look, we used the combination of mesh painted maps, which can define larger wrinkles, baked ambient occlusion, roughness, and material mass. For finer details, the artist can define separate micro-tiling textures to get sufficient up-close resolution. To get realistic micro-tiling textures, we took advantage of the Quixel scan library. Well, that ends my talk about character look development. I'll pass it back to Lana to wrap things up.
Thanks, Pete, and special thanks to the incredible people who contributed to bringing these characters to life. Coming from a background in film VFX, I'm truly amazed by what's possible now with Unreal Engine. What used to take hours per frame to render can now be produced in milliseconds. And with MetaHuman Creator, next-gen characters have never been more accessible. Thanks so much for joining us, and please check out all the other tech talks to learn about how we use these characters in cinematics and gameplay, and how we created the incredible world that they inhabit.